run across the yard.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
A good-sized man, or something. It looks like a man.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was.
Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
Son of a bitch is about 6'9".
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big, real big person.
But it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person or somebody really big.
Evening, folks. Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses. Tonight we're going to be talking with Ryan, who has actually been on the show and told a couple of his encounters in the past. And in talking with him offline, I discovered that he used to work with the in logging, and his family, I guess, has been working in logging for generations. So he's coming on tonight to talk about this whole conspiracy theory and from a standpoint of a logging family. Ryan, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
All right. So why don't you go ahead and talk about your connection to the logging industry?
My family, or at least my father anyway, has been a logger ever since he was fresh out of high school, and he still is to this day off and on, although he does other things too. I grew up in a small town, vegetable market, for it, forest industry, and that's what's in my present family. Parents were involved in either logging or log trucking.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
Let me call you back real quick. We got a really bad connection. Let me call you right back. All right, folks. He's got a really bad connection. He's an on-the-road trucker, so he's always in all different areas. So I'm going to call him back, see if we can get a little bit better connection with him. Yeah, say something now.
All right.
That's much better. That's much better.
All right.
So we didn't really hear much of what you said, so go ahead and start over again.
Oh, well, all right. My apology. What I was saying was I was born into a logging family. My father started logging when he was just a teenager, and he still logs today, off and on. And I grew up in a small town in Central Oregon that was mainly the main source of employment was logging, either directly in the woods or log trucking or working at the mills. There were several nearby mills. So pretty much everybody that I knew growing up, their families were involved in timber also in some form or another. And so I was very heavily exposed to it my whole life. My dad, he used to take me to work with him all the time, especially if work was slow. I loved going out there to the woods with him. It was extremely interesting to me. So when I got older, about the time I was leaving high school, I took some work at working for a small timber contractor up near Portland, and he was an old family friend. And I worked for him for a while, and got some experience there. I returned back to Central Oregon and worked in a mill and a sort yard around there, and basically stayed in that industry until I left for the Army when I was about 19.
All right. So, was there ever any talk in your family about this, about Bigfoot and what it would cause the logging industry and all that kind of stuff?
Say that again. I didn't catch that very well.
I said, so was there any talk in your family about any of this Bigfoot stuff and what it might cause, what kind of problems it might cause for the logging and all that kind of stuff?
No, I can honestly say that growing up in the time that I did, I never heard much about Bigfoot in relation to the work that my father or other people that I knew were doing. When I grew up, the spotted owl craze was just going nuts, and that was the biggest concern at that time was everybody was in fear of their job, basically, with not knowing what was going to happen with the spotted owl. And there was many times I can remember when my dad was pretty much a wreck, not knowing what he was going to do.
And what was the outcome of the whole spotted owl thing? Are you there? Yep, looks like we lost him again. Hold on, folks. You there, Ryan?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you there for a minute. So what was the...
I'm not...
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the outcome of this whole spotted owl thing?
Well, it's no big mystery, really, how the spotted owl movement ended up. Basically, the timber industry absolutely crashed because of it, and I watched many people that I was close with, or that my family was close with, shut down, or not shut down, but go look for other work in other industries because the forestry jobs were just drying up everywhere. There was, even before it was actually put on the endangered species list, there were logging companies that were trying to sell out while they still had a chance to make a profit. I can think of a couple of different companies just in the area that I was in that went ahead and closed up shop and liquidated all their assets before the spotted owl was even officially designated as an endangered species, just because they had the foresight to know that if they waited until afterwards, they would probably be bankrupt. And that was kind of the case with my father. He was running his own log truck at the time, and he went ahead and got rid of it and just went back to working for another company just so that he wouldn't have, to worry about trying to keep this truck working in an environment where jobs were becoming less and less common every day.
So, do you think that the logging industry has kind of shored itself up since that whole spotted owl thing to where they could handle it a little better now?
Well, the my dad always called them the glory days, but to be honest, the days of the days of logging as it was back in the 80s and 90s and stuff, I honestly don't think we'll ever return to that. Currently, logging and forestry products are probably doing better at the moment than they have in the last 30 years. But it certainly is nothing like it was back then. And I really honestly don't think it ever will be either. I think those days are gone. And I think that while it is still an extremely important industry, it has been highly industrialized to the point where there aren't many small companies left. There are a few out there, but the days of finding a half dozen small logging companies in any given town in the Pacific Northwest are long gone. So I think we're doing better now than we have been in recent years, but like I said, the glory days are gone.
So there's a lot of talk about that Bigfoot would just absolutely destroy the logging industry. What is your perspective on that? Do you think it's already been taken care of and nothing's really going to hurt it anymore, or do you think that it's true? It'll destroy everything and cause a big problem?
Well, all right. Listen, here's a hypothetical. All right, say that somehow. This is my opinion. I want everyone to know this is my opinion. Let's say that somehow somebody produced a Bigfoot tomorrow. I think by the end of the week, the forestry industry in this country, and not even just our country, the forestry industry in Canada as well, I think it would absolutely be crippled. I think that I think jobs would be logging equipment that'd be abandoned right in the woods, right where it's at. Back in the late 80s, up in Alaska, Bill Clinton went through and he initiated the roadless. Can't remember the exact name of the program, but it was the Roadless Tracks Initiative or something like that. Basically, he shut down the entire Tongass National Forest in Alaska, which is where all the logging was going on in that state. And I have a friend that lives up in Juneau. He's a bit of a logging historian, and I was talking to him about this subject, and he sent me a bunch of pictures and stuff of up there where the logging equipment and trucks and stuff were abandoned right on the jobs, like they were working one day, and then this bill was passed shutting down the forest, and these guys didn't even bother pulling their equipment back out of the woods. They just left it up there, and he showed me hundreds of pictures. He actually has a website dedicated to the abandonment of the logging industry in southeast Alaska, and I kind of think that's could likely be a scenario of what would happen if Bigfoot were proved to be in existence. I think a lot of these guys would be out of a job in a matter of 24, 48 hours. I think everything would just freeze. I think the mills would finish off the logs that they already had in their storage, but I don't think they would. I think the government would put a freeze on the forest contracts that are already going on out there, and I almost think that they would probably step in and even freeze private land contracts. Weyerhaeuser, with the acquisition of Plum Creek and several of the other big timber landowners out there, Weyerhaeuser is the single biggest private landowner on earth, and I honestly think that the government would freeze even their own land, tell them they couldn't log their own land anymore. So it'd be incredibly devastating to the industry, and as a ripple effect, it would be devastating to all subsequent industries, milling and paper, furniture, even the industry, just the small mom and pop industries in towns that are still supported by timber dollars. Think about those towns that there's primary source of employment is the forest industry. That would have effects all the way down to just like small restaurants and stores and things like that. It would be far-reaching and very devastating.
Okay, and what do you think would be the actual cause of all of this problem? It wouldn't be the discovery of or the acknowledgement of the existence of Bigfoot itself, right? It would be somebody trying to create protected sanctuaries for Bigfoot or protect the animal or whatever, similar to the spotted owl, correct?
Right. When the spotted owl happened, the environmental groups, they just had a field day with it. There were protests, there were road blocking, there was all sorts of. They just caused havoc for these timber companies that were still logging in these, especially in these old growth forests, where it was known that these owls lived, and it would happen. I think, in a much more aggressive degree with Sasquatch. I really think that. I don't even think that the environmental groups would really have to do much. I honestly think that the government would step in almost immediately and shut down or freeze all logging contracts on federal land. That includes Forest Service timber sales and BLM land management sales and things like that. They would just freeze those outright. But also, I honestly think that they would threaten, or I don't want to say martial law. I don't know that would be the right term, but I think they would be able to stop private landowners from even logging their own land, especially if they were in an area where it was determined that these creatures were most likely to be. These remote mountain areas or remote timber areas in the Pacific Northwest or in the South. So I think it would be a nearly an immediate effect. I think that the industry would just be in a total freeze within probably just a week.
Do you really think that the federal government would shut down the national forests if Bigfoot was, out in the open?
Well,
I mean, I don't. I really don't. I mean, that's because there's too much money to be made. The government makes money off the national forests. If Bigfoot was out and there was nothing they could do about it, they're not going to shut down this large money-making machine for the government. I think that they would.
Well, let me clarify.
Go ahead.
Let me clarify by saying right now that I honestly believe the government already knows about Sasquatch. Not a doubt in my mind. And I truly think that Sasquatch is an underlying reason of a lot of these giant land swaps that are going on between states and the federal government and private industry and the federal government. In the news a lot in the last several years, Weyerhaeuser has been trading land with with states and the federal government on a massive scale. And I think there's two different ways to look at that. You can look at it as the government is approaching Weyerhaeuser, and this is happening with other companies too, but I'm going to use Weyerhaeuser as my example. You could say that the government is approaching Weyerhaeuser and swapping them out for land where they know that these creatures are, as a way to but expand, wildlife habitat. Or you could look at it from the other point of view, or maybe, let's say, Weyerhaeuser knows that these creatures are there, and they're trying to swap out the land so that they have. So that if this does come to fruition, where it is revealed that this is a living, breathing, real creature, they won't get caught up in it so much because they will not have those parcels of land. This is a subject I've been doing a lot of research on and trying to make sense of. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not finding very much to go on. It is a very hard subject to research, as I'm finding out.
Did you read the Miller document?
Which one?
The Miller document?
Yeah, I have read the Miller document, and I've also listened to some other people's opinions on the Miller document, and I have to say that is in particular very interesting. And
well, it kind of goes along with what you're saying about Weyerhaeuser swapping off land and that kind of thing. In that, in the background, the government is trying to create these habitats for the day that's going to come when Bigfoot is finally out in the open. But
yes, this Miller gentleman actually mentions in his papers that they are setting up or would be setting up reserves for this creature, and I kind of feel that these land swaps are indeed what that is. I mean, they are using it under different pretexts, calling it different things, setting up habitat for known animals or swapping out land that is less beneficial for the forest industry for land that is more beneficial. But at the underlying cause of it, I kind of think that this is, if not the main reason, definitely a very important underlying reason.
Yeah, here the thing that I believe that's what they're doing. I think that they're trying to get ahead of the 8 ball because this is going to come out, and in order to minimize the damage, they're keeping it quiet as best as they can, so that they don't have to go through and shut down all of the national forests out there, so that they don't have to shut down everybody. And they're trying to set aside these land areas where they can say, all right, this is where they are. Y'all leave them alone, or I don't know what they'll eventually do. It just depends on just how dangerous these things are. I mean,
right.
They take people and eat them. We know that. Well, on what scale? If it's a very small scale, then, I can see them doing some kind of, where, hey, they're out there, be careful, that kind of thing. If they're very dangerous and
right.
there more of them are have a tendency to kill and eat people than what everyone thinks, then they're going to try and lock up that land and say it's restricted. You can't go out there at all. But the thing of it is that Bigfoots are everywhere. People don't realize that these things are everywhere. I personally don't think that they are endangered. I think that there are enough of them out there that they wouldn't even be on an endangered list. You hear all of these stories about people who have Bigfoot encounters, and there's 5 or 7 of them in a group. Well, you hear that a lot. That means that there's a whole lot of them out there. And I don't think that they are endangered. I don't think their numbers are that low. So I don't think
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, and they're everywhere. So even if the government does set up these reserves, they're not going to stop them from being everywhere. They can't control them. We had Mark Zaski on here last week, and he talked about how he actually was involved in building the fences. He didn't realize that's what he was doing. He just had a job as building fences, but he later found out that that's what that area was, and that's where he does his research. Yeah. Well, he came on here and said he could see where the fence had been bent down and a tree was laid across of it, and obviously the Bigfoots were getting through the fence, and that's going to happen on the areas that they are making as preserves, reserves, whatever the accurate name is. But you're also going to have the ones that are out there in the other areas that aren't reserves anyway, and they're not going anywhere. What are they going to keep sending special forces out to kill them? I don't think so. I think there's too many of them for them to do that.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I agree with him too. I listened to that podcast, and I had also heard him on Chronicles, and I was very interested in what he had to say. But you're absolutely right. I think if we were somehow able to, I think if we knew how many of these creatures really are out there, I think it would be just mind-boggling. I think there are a lot of these creatures out there, and they really are everywhere. Not only just in North America, but they're everywhere in the world, really. And there's different theories on whether they are a migratory creature. I don't necessarily think they are personally, but if they're a migratory creature, then your little wildlife refuges that you're setting up specifically for these animals are only going to do so much good. They're still going to travel from place to place, and when they're traveling, they're not going to be on those refuges. They're going to be walking through yours and my backyard. Well, hypothetically, you know what I mean. But
right.
They're not going to be in these protected areas. So that's just one case of the argument. Now, if you're like me and don't necessarily believe that they're migratory animal, then yeah, this might work a little better. But still, they are going to, just like the trouble they have up in Yellowstone. They reintroduced the wolves there, and they thought that this was going to be a great idea. The wolves would stay inside the caldera and inside the park boundaries, and everybody would be happy. And it didn't take no time for the wolves to start, showing up outside of the park boundaries and just wreaking havoc with the local ranchers, and that just turned into a whole, mess by itself. And while I don't think, I think that Sasquatch will always be the way it kind of is right now. It is an animal that is seen occasionally when people are in the right place at the right time. But I think it is an intelligent animal that goes well out of its way to stay hidden. And I don't think that just because we prove that it actually exists, that will ever change.
Right. I think actually that's probably just the best way for the government to go about it is they don't really have to change anything. Just let us know that they're out there. If they've done any research to where they know what's the best way to keep yourself safe, if they know, well, they don't they won't, you have people know like a mountain gorilla. If you come across one, don't move, that kind of thing. If they had some guidelines where they had some zoologists who have studied the things, for probably some time at this point, who can say, this is the best way to handle an encounter with one of these things and put that information out there to anyone who's going to go out into these forests. Well, anyone who lives in an area where they might run across them and that kind of thing, that's just the best that they can do. I mean, look at grizzly bears, they're out there. There's nothing you can do. If you went out in your backyard and there's a grizzly bear there, you either have to know how to react or, hope that you get lucky, and it doesn't want to eat you at that time, because a grizzly bear is a pretty dangerous animal.
Very much. A lot of people make the argument that the government knows about Sasquatch and just won't admit to it. And I happen to believe that myself. There's other good examples of that. For example, the mountain lion. The mountain lion officially is extinct in Pennsylvania, yet reports every year come out of Pennsylvania of mountain lions. Grizzly bears officially don't exist in Oregon and Northern California, and yet every single year we get reports of grizzly bears in Oregon and Northern California. It wasn't until just a couple of years ago that the government finally admitted that wolves are in Oregon. I've heard from people who live in Virginia, pretty close to where I saw my Bigfoot, that have said that there are wolves all the way down into Virginia, along the Appalachians. And I was like, what? There weren't any wolves back, when I was a kid. Well, there are quite a few of them around there now, I guess. And yeah, I've heard the same thing. Yeah, so if they're going to
they reintroduce an animal, they should have expected this. The animals are going to go where they want to go. You're not going to stop them.
No, you're not going to stop them at all.
Unless you can somehow put up, I mean, and this would be a science fiction, really. Somehow you can put up some Jurassic Park situation where you know that all of these areas in the United States are absolutely, completely walled off, and that the animals can't get out, and that's never going to happen. Especially a Sasquatch, they'll always find a way. You could probably control grizzly bears, cougars, and wolves a lot easier than you're ever going to control a Sasquatch.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, I absolutely believe that Sasquatch is a highly, highly intelligent creature. And like the gentleman that was on your show last week, he was talking about building those fences and stuff down in Florida. And he was talking about how that tree had been dragged and put on the fence. And, why on earth should that be an isolated thing that only happened one time in Florida? What is there to make anyone think that wouldn't happen all over the country if we started fencing in all these areas?
Yeah, exactly. And what got me is that the fence was only 8 foot tall with barbed wire at the top. That's not going to keep a Sasquatch in, I think you'd have to do a double fence, and they would have to be welded together or something. And even then, it would probably deter, and they'd probably have to be at least 12 feet tall, and then razor wire at the top, and that probably wouldn't stop a Sasquatch from getting through, but it would probably deter most of them. It's kind of like putting a lock on your door. If a thief really wants to get in your house, he's going to. It don't matter how good a locks you put on your door. If they really want in, they're going to. But it takes a very determined thief. Most thieves aren't that determined. They just want something that's easy. They can get in, get out. I think Sasquatch are the same way. There's only so far they're going to go. If there was no game and they were starving and they absolutely had to get through the fence, I think, yeah, they would. It wouldn't matter what kind of fence it was or how good it was. They'd get through. But if you make it sturdy enough, then they're going to be like, it ain't worth it. I'll go over here and get me a deer, something like that. And they'll tend to stay in there. But an 8 foot fence with barbed wire. Go ahead.
If these animals weigh as much as they say they do, and they're as big as they say they are, 8 to 10 feet tall, 800 to 1,000 pounds in some cases, I can't imagine the fence that you are going to have to build to keep one, or more likely a group of these creatures behind it if they really want through it. I hear all these stories, people saying that these creatures are slapping their houses or hitting their houses, or they're trying to get into their RVs or their houses. And I don't think they're trying to get into their RVs or houses. Not for a second do I believe that if that creature wanted into your RV or your house, that it couldn't get in. They're just too big and too powerful, and I don't think there's any door on your everyday house or RV that's going to stop this creature. I think that most of these accounts that they're talking about are intimidation. They're trying to scare you out of there, or no, that's what I think it is. I think they're just trying to scare you more than anything, because there's absolutely no reason that animal can't get into that house if it wants to.
Yeah, I mean, there's that story of the people in the RV and Land Between the Lakes who were killed, and evidently the Bigfoot actually went inside the RV and killed the mother and took the 9-year-old girl from the back bedroom. So it was in there, and it got out, and she was found in a tree half eaten, so they will go in.
Yeah.
And, I
hear these in there, it'll get in fine.
Yeah. And I hear these stories about, Bigfoot's standing in a big picture window, which are huge. You can break these things easily,
Yeah.
A Bigfoot could easily. Why are they honoring a window, a piece of glass? It actually boggles my mind that they actually know that it's a window.
Well, the case that your encounter where you were sitting around the table with your family and the creature was looking in the window at you guys, the only thing stopping it from reaching in was that pane of glass. If it had actually wanted to come in there, it would not have had any trouble from the description I got of your story.
Well, it was one of those half windows that, those farmhouses, how they have that window that's like a half a sash or whatever, a single sash, however they say it. That's like towards the top of the wall. It's not a full window. So if like
Right.
when I was a kid, if I was standing up, I could look out the window, and the bottom of the windowsill would have been somewhere below my chin, maybe in my chest, the area. So we were sitting at the kitchen table, which was right below the window, and the table was pushed up against the wall. But that Bigfoot, based on their arm reach, he could probably have crashed through the window and grabbed my cousin Teresa, and maybe even me, because it was just a small old 1950s, with the metal around the edges of them, that kind of old table. That's all it was.
Right.
And the lengthways, it was going along the wall, so it wasn't like I was only maybe 4 feet from the window, 5 feet, however wide those tables were. So yeah, he could have easily
think
reached
about
in
that
there.
account. Think about that account of the miners in Washington in 1924. I really think that the only thing that saved their life was they were in a log cabin that was built of whole logs, big heavy timbers. It was built very sturdy, and the number one thing is that cabin did not have one single window.
Right, so it was all interlocking trees, basically. So Bigfoots can move trees, but when you get a structure and you interlock everything like that, it increases the strength of the structure an order of magnitude, some kind of exponential number. I don't even know what it is. I'm not an engineer, but I know that it does. It's a lot easier for them to carry and break one tree, but when you stack them all together like that, that's what saved their lives, is the strength of that cabin. And they even said something about the cabin
Right.
was moving and stuff, because it was only up on, what was it? I don't think it was even up on blocks. I think it was up on rocks, So but that's what saved them, is the strength of the building. The Sasquatch tried to get
Right.
in, and they busted out some of the, what do they call it? The mud crap that they put in between the logs to like seal the holes. And
Yeah,
stuff.
cracked out some of the mortar in between the logs, and apparently depending on the version of the story you hear, there was one that was actually underneath the cabin and was trying to pry up or push up the floorboards, and I can't imagine how scary that would be. They said that they were just shooting blindly through the ceiling and through the floor of this cabin, trying to when you get pushed to a point where you're so scared that you will shoot blindly and have no idea what you're shooting at, that's a horrible, horrible feeling. And I can't imagine, what was going through those men's heads.
Right, and I found it amazing that, think about it. That means the Bigfoot knew that they couldn't get through the walls, but they knew that the floor was weaker, or they knew enough to see if the floor was weaker in the roof.
Yeah.
Which it was.
That goes
it was
back
only
to
boards.
That goes back to that intelligence level that I honestly feel that they have. I think they are problem solvers, and I think that they are. There's a lot of people out there that attest to how intelligent they think these creatures are, and I honestly feel that they are more intelligent than even those guys give them credit for. There's that whole study going on right now of whether they actually have a language, like they can actually talk to each other, not the way normal animals do, but intelligently like humans can. And not that long ago, I would say you were absolutely crazy if you told me that. And the more I listen to some of these audio clips, like the samurai chatter is probably the best evidence, I think, for that. The more I think that this may really be possible.
Oh yeah. I actually have an audio recording that I forget who it was. I think Susan, had sent me the link to it. And I'm going to put it up online. I cleaned up the audio a little bit, and it's some of the best audio that I've heard. You know, it's the Sasquatch evidently came right up to the recorder, and it was doing stuff. It was breaking sticks and smacking rocks, and it was making some vocalizations and stuff like that. Very interesting. I'm going to put that video video up here shortly with the cleaned up audio.
I can't remember when it was, but I remember you and I were talking a while back about this stuff, and I told you that about the time my dad was logging down in Bly, Oregon, and him and two other guys were sitting around eating their lunch, and they could hear people talking out in the woods. They couldn't ever see anything, but they could very clearly hear people talking and in a language that they didn't understand, or that was moving too fast for them to understand. And my dad never knew what to make of that. And it was only here not too long ago that he actually heard a recording of samurai chatter. It might have even been is either the audio clip from the Siege of Hanobia or the audio clip of the Sierra Sounds. But he said that was what he heard. He had never heard it of anyone mentioning it before. He didn't have anything to go off of. But once he heard that, he said that was it.
That's interesting. And that's the story where you said that they had to wait for like an hour or 4 hours or something for people to come back and get them, and they had to sit there and listen, and they knew something was out there and all that.
No, that wasn't that. That was something else. This was they were outside of. There's a little town in southern Oregon between Lakeview and Klamath Falls called Bly, and it's just a really creepy place to begin with. But they were logging up there in winter, and they had gone in there one morning to work, and they had gotten a fresh snow, and it was many miles. I think my dad said it was like 10 miles back up this road that they had built to get to where they were working, and there was no tracks on the road or anything, and they were in a just a complete wilderness area. And they heard this stuff during their lunch break, and it creeped them out a bit, but they finished their day, and they left out of there, and their tracks coming in were still the only tracks on the road going back out. And it was he said that this went on for a while, to the point where I believe he said one of the men that just couldn't take it anymore, and he quit the job. It creeped him out way too bad.
Yeah, that was an interesting story. So we're getting off track here. As far as the logging goes,
yeah, we are.
Yeah, this is supposed to be about the logging conspiracy. What do you think? Do you think the government is actually involved in this for the sake of the logging?
Well, I say that again.
Do you think the government is covering things up for the sake of the logging, or do you think that it's just a like another aspect of it, that a lesser aspect?
I think it's another aspect of it. I don't think it's a lesser aspect. I think it is a major aspect, but I think there's a lot more that plays into it than just timber. Mining, I think mining is a big aspect of it also, and I think probably the single largest aspect of it is recreation and hunting. I think the total amount of money that would be lost between all of those would be so staggering it'd probably cripple our economy. The spotted owl by itself had such a rippling effect that it ended up putting a major strain on the housing market. And we went through a period there where there was a bigger demand for houses than they could actually get timber to build them. And that was just an owl. I mean, imagine if it was a primate, that, it would be North America's only primate. I think it would have far-reaching and absolute devastating effects on the entire economy as a whole. And doing a little bit of research, and like I said, I'm still doing research. I'm not finding this information is not nearly as plentiful as I'd hoped it would be, but there's a lot of evidence that this is not only going on in the U.S., but it's also going on in Canada. Back before Macmillan Bloedel was bought out by Weyerhaeuser, Macmillan Bloedel used to be one of the biggest logging companies in the world. And before they were bought out by Weyerhaeuser, and I want to say that was in '96 or 2006, I'm not sure, is one or the other. They were starting to do a lot of these big land swaps also, and with the government and the state of British Columbia. And then when Weyerhaeuser took over, they obviously acquired all of that land that they had, and are still doing land swaps with that land that they acquired. So it's not just our country that's doing it; it's their country as well. Which, begs the question: do both governments know about this? And if so, are they kind of working together on it?
Well, I think if our government knows, that they've probably told all the other governments too.
Probably.
I mean, it's probably a whole back channel conversation that goes on, amongst, because you can't have the United States saying Bigfoot doesn't exist and Canada says, oh yeah, here they are. They're right here. They exist, so they would want everyone to keep it quiet because it's going to affect all the countries when all of this comes out.
Yeah, it certainly will. And, I see evidence of these land swaps going on all over the country. The Pacific Northwest is really big for them. So is Montana, and I'm seeing them a lot now that I'm looking harder. I'm starting to see them a lot down in the Carolinas and in northern Georgia and the South also. But I'm also starting to see issues that I think are at least partially related happening all the way up in Alaska. One of the biggest controversies going on up there right now, and it has been for the last several years, is the Pebble Mine. And for anyone that's not familiar with it, the Pebble Mine is this giant mine that they are trying to establish and build north of Lake Iliamna in Alaska. And the argument is that it'll, disrupt salmon streams and hunting grounds, and this is Native American land and stuff. But also, one thing that I've found is the exact area where they're wanting to build this mine is that has a long history, heavy history of Sasquatch sightings and interactions. And also, I don't know if you believe in it or not. I don't know if I do yet. I'm still, the book's still out on that one. But mountain giants, there are reports of mountain giants out of that area of Alaska, and it's one of the few places in North America where mountain giant sightings are actually not plentiful, but there's more than just a couple of them. So that's another thing to consider there.
Mountain giants, I've looked into that. I need to look into it some more. I'm going to be skeptical on that one. I think that more than likely mountain giants are just Bigfoots. Well,
I'm a little skeptical on it too.
And I'm skeptical in it as far as, like, I've heard people say they're 40 feet tall. I don't know about that. Yeah, I think they're Bigfoots, and I think that they're exaggerating.
Yeah, 40 foot is, that's a big stretch there. You go out on the highway and look at a semi trailer; those are only 50 foot. That would be a huge creature.
Oh yeah, I don't think I'm real skeptical about that. I mean, it's tough to say that because I don't believe in Bigfoot. I know they exist. I've seen one. But prior to seeing one, I've always been open-minded. I would have been, well, maybe, I guess they could be out there, whatever. But I would have thought it's probably a fairy tale because they said it's a hairy man. And I have always had an issue with that. I have an issue with people saying that there are types of Bigfoots that look exactly like people, except they're covered with hair. I could be. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think Bigfoot's, the one I saw is up on the screen right now. That's what I saw. To me, that is what a Bigfoot is, and that's because it's the one I saw. But I also think it's a primate. So it's going to look like a primate. We look like we do because of our evolution without hair and because of our separation from the primates. So if they are looking like humans, then there has to be a common ancestor, if you ask me. And that's why I'm always asking about the genitalia and that kind of thing, because the breasts and the female genitalia is only with humans. So if they have both of those aspects, it's already enough that they carry breasts just like humans. That alone could tell you that we have to have a common ancestor. But if you go with the genitalia being the same and the breasts, then to me, you just can't argue that. And then it would be easier for me to believe that there are some out there that look exactly like humans. Because, like I said, you have everything from Andre the Giant to Justin Bieber or Bieber, Justin Bieber and Andre, Andre the Giant, as far as their looks. So I guess it's possible, but I don't think that there would be a drastic change from one to the other. I think that you would see similarities, but more softer looks and harder looks, like Andre the Giant and Justin Bieber. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you listen to a lot of these quote unquote researchers out there, and I respect everything they have to say, and they put a lot of work into what they're talking about. So, but some of these guys are saying that they feel that there are as much as 6 to 7 more different species of Sasquatch out there, all the way from the Patty out in Northern California to the ones that I hear about occasionally out on the East Coast that are literally just a really hairy human being, and I don't know that I can go along with that many different types, but I guess it's possible. There's a lot of different types of apes, great apes that we already know about. But that's a whole lot to swallow on top of whether this creature actually exists or not. And like you just said, the only difference between somebody that believes in Sasquatch and somebody that knows Sasquatch exists is one sighting. The people that have seen Sasquatch will never say they believe in Sasquatch because they know it's real.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. Well, and the thing that is with this whole types thing, I don't think that there are that big a difference. It's either we have a species out there, or we have multiple species out there, and I have a hard time believing that we have multiple primate species out there that are undiscovered. I can see one, that has this intelligence, because it would be all of them would have that level of intelligence. But just like humans, you have some people who aren't quite as bright as others, But with Sasquatch, they would all have a similar intelligence and a similar capabilities and that kind of thing. But you're not going to find that with multiple species that have, what are they? I forget what they're calling them. Unknown hominids or whatever, that we used to live simultaneously with multiple, other human-like species, and that they've all died off. And some people think that the Bigfoot is one of those species that actually never died off. I can buy into that. But when you're trying to tell me that there's 4 or 6 different types of Bigfoots, they're so different that I don't believe that. I think that they're all the same. They just kind of have small, kind of like an Asian person and a Scandinavian person. That to me is more likely the story. I don't think you're talking about like dogmen. I find it hard you just cannot find a scientific avenue for a dogman to become a reality. There just isn't one. How does a dogman stand up on its hind legs and it still has dog feet? That's doesn't make much sense to me.
Right. The whole dogman thing just drives me nuts. I can absolutely buy in that Sasquatch is real, just if for no other reason, because we know that there is a creature, Gigantopithecus blacki, which very closely matches the description of a dogman. I mean, not a dogman, a Sasquatch, that we absolutely know without a doubt did exist.
Right.
the idea that a dog man exists is I want to believe that it's possible, but sometimes it's just a little more than I can buy into. But but I like your what you said about the difference between these animals might be nothing more than, say, the difference between a Scandinavian and a Far Asian. That kind of makes sense. I can buy into that, but
Right.
the other way, what we were talking about, that's
Right.
a little much, I think. But
Now
but
I've seen people who look like Pekingese, and I've seen people who look like greyhounds in the face. They have very, very long, big nose, and their face is drawn out. And they look similar to a greyhound. If you know how there's a saying, people and their dogs usually look alike. And I find that sometimes that is true. I've met females that look just like Pekingeses. Their faces all mashed in. And I'm not trying to upset anyone out there, but it's true, And why can't you have that in Bigfoot? They're not necessarily dogmen. Maybe they just have a big schnoz on them, and they look like they have a dog face, Maybe that's what it is.
yeah,
I don't.
it could be. That's
And then I think people are filling in the blanks. They're saying, "Oh yeah, and it had dog feet too," But then you hear about people who have cast dog feet. And, I'm like, well, okay, there's probably a wolf around there. Well, but it's bigger than a wolf. Well, maybe it's just a big wolf. I don't know exactly how big this was, but these are stories I've heard, that people have.
Well, one thing I do agree with, and one thing I do believe in, is that depending on the part of the country that you're in, these things may have very different aggression levels. You listen to different Native American stories and traditions from different parts of the country. You hear everything from these animals were to be avoided at all costs. They would kill you without provocation. To you go somewhere else in the country, and the Native Americans would say that way back in prehistory that they were not the friendly giants and whatever, but that they were, semi-docile, and that on occasion they would actually, be, like picking berries or fishing in streams right alongside of these creatures, and there was no worry about them attacking them or hurting them. It just depended on what tribe you were talking to and what part of the country.
And I think it has a lot to do with inbreeding. Inbreeding brings along a little bit of an insanity, I think. And I think it causes personality disorders and that kind of thing. I'm talking for the ones that are very aggressive and that kind of thing, like the ones down in southeast Texas, I guess. They're a lot like that. But I've also heard people say that they're kind of enclosed in that was it Sam Houston, I think, National Forest down there. That they're enclosed on all sides, so they can't travel freely, and therefore they're kind of in their own little fishbowl where they're obviously there's a lot of inbreeding going on. So that makes sense, right? That they're the most aggressive and they're the ones that are doing the most inbreeding, whereas some of the other ones, have a much more of a genetic pool to play with, so there's not as much inbreeding. I think that has something to do with their aggression. And possibly some of the three-toed things, although supposedly inbreeding will give you extra toes, not fewer toes. Supposedly that's the rule of law with inbreeding.
You don't hear often about inbreeding causing less stitches. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But I think it has something. There's some kind of genetic deformation that's causing these three-toed footprints, or maybe even an injury as a child. If the thing is only a year or two old, and a coyote comes along and chews off its toes, when it grows up, those toes will eventually fill into where they're more natural looking, especially in a footprint. Things like that could happen. We don't know what's going on.
hear cases all the time of people finding tracks of Sasquatch, and 1 foot or even occasionally both feet will have some kind of deformity, you know, a toe missing or a toe bent way off to where it shouldn't be. And I think, you know, how many times do you stub your toe walking around your house barefooted? You know, I think that the odds of having a mangled or a crippled foot on these animals are extremely likely based on where they live and you know,
lack
the
of medical care
they cover. Yeah. So I don't think you know, mangled feet on a Sasquatch is probably a very rare thing. I think it is probably a very common thing.
Yeah, I do too. Well, we're at an hour. Thanks again for coming on, man, and sharing your perspective on this whole logging thing. I don't know if I agree with it.
Well, I'm going to keep digging.
But
I'm going to keep digging and see if I can actually find something, you know, a little more concrete. Because right now, everything that we talked about tonight is mostly speculation and my own personal feelings. I just having trouble finding much evidence.
Weren't you the one who told me? It might have been somebody else, but said something about that you didn't think the spotted owl was actually what they were doing. That somebody told me they speculated that the spotted owl was a cover up or a Bigfoot.
No, that was me. You and I were talking about that, but I was repeating something else that I have heard, and I'm still trying to find where I originally heard that. But yeah, it was the spotted owl was kind of like a test run for all of this.
Yeah, because, you know, why was there such a big deal over a tiny little bird that can fly anywhere, you know? But, you know, whatever. I guess like the salmon have to go to this one specific spot to breed. So maybe the spotted owl was one of those that it would have definitely not handled it well. Who knows? So anyway, all right. That's that. And thanks for coming on, man. I'll talk to you later.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right, folks. That's it for tonight. And I'm going to be moving over the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to try and make sure that my show is on next Sunday. And I'll put a scheduled thing on if you go to my main channel page, it'll tell you if I have a show scheduled for Sunday, and if not, if it's a last minute thing. This one was actually last minute. I didn't have it scheduled right the whole time, but you can find out there if I'm going to definitely have a show next Sunday or not. And I'm definitely going to put up that audio and a little breakdown of the audio and what I think about it, and that kind of thing here. Probably in the next few days, I'll put that up. So let me get my info up here as usual. All right. So until next time, y'all take it easy.